Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host and producer. My name is James Pagoshnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from theathletic.com. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, why does everyone try to start fights with you on Twitter?
So I feel like some of this is self-explanatory. And some of it is a mystery left up to the internet. It's like both obvious and impossible to explain. Right? Like that feels right? Like I'm the kind of person that you would start a fight with on Twitter.
Possibly in real life too. But yeah, let's start with Twitter.
I have avoided physical violence for the balance of my post-high school life. And I would suggest that is because I know where the line is, but perhaps I am lucky.
Like, the ass kickings haven't happened yet, which is either the result of me knowing when to say when, or just dumb. You know what? Dumb luck is fair. We'll talk about that. Yeah, we'll talk about that more in just a moment. Thank you guys so not the physical aspect of that, but we'll talk more about that in just a moment. Thank you guys so much for listening to Norse Code. We are doing well. We have another game to review. It did not go the Vikings' way, but this is still the preseason. We don't really have to start worrying about that until next month.
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, it's fine. We're gonna have a punt off. We don't care. So we will get to all that in just a moment. But before we do, again, thank you for listening. If you enjoy the show and would like to financially support the show, you can do so in a couple of different ways. The recommended way is to go to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there. If you get the year subscription, and you still have a couple weeks left to do this, if you get the year subscription, you get into the lottery for the glorious Laquan Treadwell framed and signed jersey. This has brought the Norse Code community together in a way I didn't think was possible. It is so wonderful to see all of you wanting access to this horrible cursed item. I cannot wait to get it out of my home. I will drive it if it's within 6 hours of where I live. This is getting out of my house soon, and I cannot wait. Fantastic. Just a couple people we want to thank who have signed up over on Patreon. I want to thank Alex Goebel for upgrading his membership. Also want to thank Dustin Roberts for upgrading, and Denver Ludvigsen as well for upgrading to the year-long subscription. Again, if you are currently on the month-to-month, you can upgrade to the year-long subscription. It's $37.81 a year, as opposed to $42 a year if you do $350 for the whole year. So it is worth it. Also, a special thank you to Anthony Vetter, who sent this note. First off, I started listening to Norse Code 7 years ago in grad school. I was broke at the time, but now with a grown-up job, I wanted to make up for those 7 years of missed podcast support. Also, I hate that Laquan Treadwell was the catalyst to get me to pull the trigger. Do I get...
Okay, look, if you've been listening for 7 years, you are the exact kind of sick individual who would be thus motivated by the Laquan Treadwell signed jersey giveaway.
Yes.
Theoretically game worn.
It's within the realm of possibilities. Right. I hate that Laquan Treadwell was a catalyst to get me to pull the trigger. Do I get a raffle ticket for each year? Do I even want a shadow box? If I win, how much extra do I need to donate to make James keep it? Let me be perfectly clear. This is not an option.
We've discussed this before, right?
Probably. This is not happening. This cursed item is leaving my home, and it will be great when it does.
I feel like there have just been so many great horror movies where you attempt to get rid of the object that is causing you so much terror, and it just returns in new and inventive ways.
Yep.
That's Roger Goodell.
That is, in fact, the picture of Roger Goodell in my bedroom. Number 3, I also saw that Blair Walsh field goal go through the uprights from my angle at TCF Bank. I know what I saw. So did everyone around me. Hashtag the truth is out there. Thank you again, Anthony, so much for your support. Again, patreon.com/NorseCode. You guys are getting a bonus episode later this week, so enjoy that. Also, you can donate to the show at paypal.me/NorseCode as well, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com. Also, a couple of quick notes. The Fantasy Football Lottery is open until Wednesday at midnight. Again, Wednesday at midnight. This will be closed. So Wednesday, August 24th at midnight Central, it will be closed, and I will begin drawing later this week, so you can start checking your emails. If you want in, DM the NorseCodeDN Twitter account, or send an email to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com, and I will get you on the list. There's more leagues than ever this year, so that your chance of getting in is better than ever. So if you want to join the Hell League, now is your chance. And finally, just letting you guys know once again, we are doing a live episode after the Saints game, October 2nd at Antwerp Arms in London, North London specifically. Check us out. We'll be out there about an hour or so after the game. Kind of waiting for Arif to get out of the presser and everything to get set up. So check us out, antwerparms.co.uk. That is where we're going to be after the game. So check us out. Looking forward to meeting all of you awesome people. All right, so before we actually review the 49ers game, again, why do players beef with you on Twitter? It's not like you wrote an article saying that this particular player is bad at football. Like, you didn't title it this way anyway.
Yeah, correct. Not this time.
No, not this time.
I don't know. Honestly, like I kind of just put stuff out there. Look, I was talking to Matthew Collar about this, who has also had players beef with him on Twitter, and I was like, why me more than anyone else? And Collar was like, have you seen your tweets? So that's a fair response, I think. Because when people are mad at Collar, it's like a snippet of a podcast or something, and then players go after that. Where like I, for some reason, have a talent for finding out which player's name search, talking about them, and then finding out a couple of days later that they found my tweet or something. Well, I guess in this case with Chandon Sullivan, I found out within minutes of him tweeting, so that was nice.
It was impressive.
Everyone like walked up to me and was like, "Hey, Arif, so when are you and Chandon Sullivan fighting?" And I was like, come on, man.
This really is high school, isn't it?
Yeah, right.
Listen, all I want is my pizza and my ranch so I can dip my pizza in my ranch. That's
classic Midwest high school behavior.
That's classic. I hate ranch, but yes, that's classic. I'm willing to pretend for the bit that is exactly what you want in this instance. You want no trouble. You're just like, listen, man.
My pizza and my ranch, but not from Pizza Ranch.
Yes, that. So that was, and the worst part of it was he's a former Packer, and so there's all sorts of Packers people as well in there needling him too. So the whole interaction just didn't look good on anyone's end, except for, I suppose, you for just going, I don't know what's wrong here.
Right. Okay. So he found a tweet that I sent live during the Raiders game, which, first of all, tweets that occur live during games, immunity. You just get immunity. But second, it was a tweet that referenced the fact that he just gave up a 20-yarder to Keelan Cole, right? Like 3rd and 9, like 11:50 or something left in the first quarter. He gives up 20 yards, right? And the first down conversion on 3rd down. Like, come on, man. Of all the times, right? I've tweeted about him a couple of times, right? Of all the times to figure out the thing I want, like, hey, man, I'm not having a bad camp. I just gave up a 20-yarder to Keelan Cole. Okay. But I didn't respond. I just retweeted it because I thought it was funny. Players are in prove me wrong mode, so I don't really care. If I'm wrong, that's fantastic. If I'm right, that's fantastic. Honestly, it's just good for my brand either way.
Especially when people take your quotes, or your tweets rather, out of context and make the image out of them. That's been my favorite thing this year.
So good. I'm like finding increasingly graphic ways to make Luke's life miserable or end it. And people immediately make a quote. It's incredible.
Well, you're no longer a silenced hexagon on Twitter, so
No, I'm a psyop,
yeah.
which actually is also a Luke Braun invention. So credit to him for all the times I appear in these image quotes.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the 49ers game before we talk about the signing of or rather the trade that led to the new backup quarterback coming in. So let's talk about the 49ers game. You could call this a great defensive battle between two teams. You'd be wrong. You'd be wrong, but you could call it that. You could also call this an incredibly anemic offense versus another incredibly anemic offense. There were moments where the defense kind of shined, but for the most part, this was a battle of two offenses that looked sad.
Yeah, I think that's maybe the best way to characterize it. Like you said, there were moments where the defenses shined. I think especially the Vikings defensive line just generally looked pretty good, especially at the beginning when you had a lot more. You had 9 snaps of like Armon Watts and Jonathan Bullard and James Lynch. They did a really good job out there with Patrick Jones and DJ Wanham to shut down the run, to create pressure, to do all these things that made the 49ers offense just so tough to advance. So that was probably, I think, maybe the highlight. And we did see, a lot of people have already seen the T.Y. McGill stories, but we did see, some continued performance at that position. But yeah, I mean, we saw a little bit, defensively from, players like Harrison Hand, who just got cut. He had a pretty good game. We saw a little bit from Troy Dye, which you needed that comeback game. Caleb Evans led the team in tackles, and they weren't bad. Like he did not do a bad job. Even though a defensive back that's leading the team in tackles is usually not in a very good position because they're giving up a ton of receptions, but he kept everything in front of him. So there were moments where we found these individual defenders doing a really good job. But yeah, primarily it was just kind of an issue where the offenses were just not good. Even the pass blocking, for both offenses, the Vikings were kind of victimized by their own offensive line, which, that's new, right? But we saw a pretty bad game from Ed Ingram. We saw a pretty bad game from Vidarian Lowe, the 2 rookies that the Vikings have. We saw from a pass blocking perspective, not a great game from Oli Udoh. And even Kyle Hinton, who is probably the best looking, maybe besides Blake Brandel, the best looking offensive lineman among that group. Still just kind of mistakes, right? And so that was primarily the issue on both offenses. But yeah, I think that's maybe the best way to put it, is that the offenses struggled to do stuff. The defenses were present for that struggle.
Well, should we talk about Kellen Mond? Kellen Mond looked good for a couple of moments and then had a real ugly pick on that first drive.
Yeah, I mean, his first drive and his last drive were just ugly picks, right? That last pick was the worst one, but yeah, that first pick was pretty bad. I want to say it was to the left sideline, and it could have been a pick 6 had the return been a little bit better. But that was just one where I couldn't tell if it was necessarily an inaccuracy or misread, but certainly the ball being there made no sense at all, right? Because the player in that general vicinity was relatively well covered, and that pick just kind of appeared. If there had been more momentum or a better return, yeah. And this is kind of why, I saw a tweet. I don't know if a couple of people or if it's just one person. If it's just one person, I'm sorry if I'm putting you on blast. It's been a couple of days. But I saw a tweet where somebody was like, you're discounting Kellen Mond's good preseason performance because it's just the preseason. And now you're using this bad preseason performance as proof that he's bad. Pick one, right? And it's well, no. The argument is that Kellen Mond's performance in the first preseason demonstrated traits that are very worrisome and will come back to bite him later. And then in the second game, we saw those traits emerge, right? And so it's a very consistent through line. And the fact that his production was good in one instance, but not good in the other instance, does not mean that there's some sort of inconsistency, right? In both cases, I'm treating the preseason seriously, just not using statistics to evaluate these players. And the fact that Mond is relatively inaccurate, especially when you get to the sidelines deep, and takes a long time to throw and signals where he's throwing. Those show up in that, at least in that first pick. That second pick, that's not a question of him signaling where he's throwing. He probably just didn't see the safety. That was just brutally bad. But yeah, I mean, pretty inaccurate. Not really reading defenses very quickly. Not very good at making decisions very quickly. Yeah, it is a bad game. I mean, Sean Mannion was not the world's gift to quarterbacking, but he certainly had a better game.
Yeah, neither of them exactly set the world on fire, and this wasn't even a game where, like, the running game could get going either. This wasn't good. Where do we start on offense? Should we start at quarterback or should we go to offensive line? Because it's not like either one of them really shined.
Well, from a run blocking perspective, so there wasn't very much run room, right? Like Alexander Madison did all right, but we didn't see as much from like Wangu and Ty Chandler. And so the run blocking generally was not very good, but like I said, like Kyle Hinton was probably the best overall performer along the offensive line. I think that what the PFF grades for the centers are higher, Austin Schlottman and Josh Sokol. But personally, from what I saw from Kyle Hinton, his ability to move up to the second level, his ability to kind of close off these lanes and seal, I thought that was fine. And so you got some interior push from some of these guys. But from a run blocking perspective, what you saw from Blake Brandell, from Ed Ingram, from Timon Paris, from Federian Lowe, it was all very whatever. It was all, there was a reason that we kept on seeing these players collapse down on top of, Ty Chandler and Kenny Wangu, and why they couldn't replicate the type of performance they had in the first preseason game, because, it's a better front that they're up against, a different type of defense that requires a different set of blocks in order to kind of unleash. Yeah, I mean, that was the highlight of the offensive line, is that some of them were pretty good at run blocking, but a lot of them were victims of how long both quarterbacks wanted to hold on to the ball, and also not very good at pass protecting generally anyway. And so you saw a lot of mistakes from the offensive line from pass protection. I mean, the Vikings keep on insisting in a way that I believe is genuine, right? Because, teams will insist that they're good at every position. But in a way that I believe is the Vikings do seem to be genuinely optimistic about the state of the depth that they have along the offensive line, along that second unit. And I find that very surprising. But then again, we didn't see Jesse Davis or Chris Reed out there, and maybe that's why they're a little bit more optimistic than we are, because Blake Brandell is genuinely a pretty good backup tackle. And if you consider Chris Reed and Jesse Davis, only backups and not starters, there's some quality there. So that might be why. But based on what we saw, because those two didn't play, there's a lot of reasons to be concerned.
Well, let's look at tight end. We don't really talk about tight end, and the tight end depth on this team is not great. So where are we at?
Well, Nick Muse showed up and had a pretty good game. So there is that. I am starting with Nick Muse because of Zach Davidson and how he did. He was probably the worst player in the game for the Vikings, and I don't just mean because he had that really brutal drop, although he did have that really brutal drop. Well, he had like 3 drops, honestly, but the one that everyone remembers is the Sean Mannion one down the middle of the field, and there was nobody in front of him. And if he had caught that while he was running in stride, given what we know about his athleticism, that could have been a touchdown, but very likely would have been like 50 plus yards. Very upsetting, because you don't get looks like that. You don't when you call offensive plays, you hope to get certain looks, and the offense finding the perfect play against the specific defense they're up against, that just doesn't happen all that often, maybe 2-3 times a game at most. And that was one of those instances, and it just led to a drop. It's very, troubling. But if that was it, it would have just been a bad moment. But he had a number of drops throughout the game, despite getting so many targets. And he honestly, like, you could make the case, maybe not fairly, maybe it's more hyperbole, but I think I'm going to throw it out there that he might have been a worse run blocker than he was as a receiver, because as a receiver, at least he got open, right? As a run blocker, he was just this insane liability. Like, he got collapsed down on by edge rushers, by safeties. He whiffed on blocks downfield. I mean, it's just like again and again and again, he was responsible for the tackle because he couldn't block the guy that he was supposed to block. And, he missed a block on special teams too. That led to Amir Smith-Marset. I don't think that was the fumble. I think that was, the one where he had like negative yardage on the return. But like, goodness, like every phase of the game, run blocking, receiving, special teams, just a disaster. Luckily, Ben Ellefson, I hate saying this about NDSU player, Ben Ellefson is like fine, and we're not seeing a ton of him. And I think that the more we see of him, the more we'll be assured that he's okay. We haven't seen any of Johnny Munt, and that's because the Vikings value him, so they didn't put him on the field. We saw some good things from Nick Muse, who I don't think is going to make the roster, but it's going to be an interesting practice squad guy. So the tight end depth is like not amazing. I don't want to put two tight ends out on the field, right? But it's not bad. It's just what we saw from the tight ends was just abysmal. But that's not the state of the roster in week 1. That's just the state of that preseason game.
Yeah. Well, let's talk wideouts. BC Johnson was out there. That's really about
it. Well, so like I think that I mentioned on the what are we calling that podcast? Football Party? I didn't come up with that name. It's a great name. You should listen to it. But on that podcast, I brought up like BC Johnson does not get the credit he deserves, and that's our fault. That's the media's fault. The people reporting on camp, because he's just doing stuff kind of consistently, day in, day out kind of stuff. Like he's not doing very much in terms of like catching your eye and making big plays. And, this is another game where he had a bunch of targets, not that many receptions, but like one of them was that interception that wasn't his fault. That was on Kellen Mond. And others were like inaccurate largely. Like he did a pretty good job getting mostly open, catching the ball when it was in his vicinity, and generating some yardage, right? Like he tied Nick Muse for the lead in total receiving yardage. And he was like, he was fine, right? And I think that the reason that he's going to make the roster is because he's more consistent than Amir Smith-Marset. And so if you're going to roster Amir Smith-Marset, you're also going to want to roster BC Johnson, because if one of your receivers goes down, you probably want BC Johnson to take that role and continue having Amir Smith-Marset develop as a receiver and be an explosive big play weapon. Because on 3rd and 8 with 2 minutes left and you're down 4, you probably want BC Johnson out there. On 2nd and 1, you're about to take a deep shot in the middle of the game, you probably want Amir Smith-Marset out there, right? It's all about kind of your risk tolerance and what value consistency has for you, and they both serve their roles. But on a play-to-play basis, you probably prefer having BC Johnson out there, at least until Amir Smith-Marset develops. So you have that. Amir Smith-Marset cannot be a returner at this point. He's just not good at it, like, which is crazy because he was like the best returner in the Big Ten for like the past 3 years, 4 years. Like he was incredible at special teams in the Big Ten. He's just not good at it for whatever reason in the NFL. Maybe it's in his head. Maybe the speed is kind of surprising him because he's used to being the fastest. He's not expecting people to get downfield that quickly. I don't know. Whatever it is, it's just let him be a receiver because he's doing a really good job as a receiver. As a returner, it's a liability. But actually, as a receiver, this is like pretty nice to see. But yeah, we didn't see anything good from Iron Mitchell. He had a pretty bad game. We saw something from Christian Jackson. I think that he's ahead in that competition. Should there be, a 6th receiver or something like that? But yeah, I mean, that's what it looks like from the wideouts.
Well, quarterbacks.
Yeah, we talked about that.
Yeah, well, it was bad enough that they brought on a new one.
Yeah, exactly. This is about as honest. I don't know. Honest is the wrong word because it implies that he's lying. But it's about as upfront as Kevin O'Connell has been about areas where he's been concerned about the depth. Where he was like, yeah, they didn't have the best outing out there. You kind of want to see more. Ultimately, I have confidence in our quarterback room. Like, it doesn't take very much reading between the lines to think, wow, Kevin O'Connell thinks these backup quarterbacks are just garbage. And indeed, they brought someone in. Like it was like inaccurate. It was late. I think that's the thing that like gets O'Connell a lot is these late quarterbacks, because you take a look at, the quarterbacks that they hold on to in Los Angeles and the things that they value is that these quarterbacks make decisions quickly and execute those decisions quickly, right? Like John Wolford from the AAF, like he has a weird stance. His arm strength is kind of unusual. He can't really always be as accurate as he needs to be because of the way that he manages his base, but he like makes a decision pretty quickly and he sticks to it. He's pretty decisive. Bryce Perkins, kind of the same thing. It's kind of decisive, not a very good quarterback. At least he's decisive, and I think that's what they're kind of looking for. These like I'm taking 3 seconds to throw the ball, guys. It's got to be driving him crazy or something. So yeah, he's inaccurate. That's bad. He's making the wrong reads. Obviously, that's worse. He's throwing picks. That's the worst. But I think that like the thing that kind of pushes him over the edge is like sometimes these guys are taking forever to throw. Nick Mullins will throw the ball. Like he'll get rid of it at least. So I think that's part of it. Is that Sean Mannion takes forever to throw the ball. Kellen Mond takes forever to throw the ball. Now Mond kind of makes up for it a little bit because of how quick his hand speed is and the arm velocity that attempts to make up for it. But he's still signaling where he's throwing, so it ultimately results in the same thing. So yeah, I mean, bad, inaccurate, poor reads. Well, Sean Mannion wasn't making poor reads. He was just being overly cautious, which is like he knows he's Sean Mannion, so I guess I can't fault him for that. But yeah, there's just like not a lot there to feel inspired by.
Well, let's go to the other side of the ball. The defense didn't look bad. In fact, had a good 4th down stop right away.
2 4th down stops, right? I think it was like the first 2 drives were.
Yeah, they looked good. For a little while there. They just didn't have an offense that could kind of move the ball.
Yeah, and again, a lot of that has to do with like the state of the offense they were up against. But like that was a really good performance from the defensive line. We saw probably the best performance we saw from Odomewo. He didn't look like that in camp. He looked a little bit better in this game than he did against the Raiders too. But honestly, it's easy to get excited about Patrick Jones. It's easy to get excited about Caleb Evans. It's super easy to get excited about T.Y. McGill and Jonathan Bullard, who both had like really great games. James Lynch had probably a better game than he's had in a little bit. We saw Troy Dye improve a little bit. Guys that really needed good games. Josh Metellus, like last week, Metellus was kind of a disaster on special teams, and that's his calling card. But he was able to play pretty well in this game. The Vikings have been kind of experimenting with ways to put him on the field, not because they're desperate to put him on the field, right? Because they've got other safeties, but rather just because they think that he's got a skill set that they can use. And we saw that, right? So I thought that there were some really standout defensive performances. I want to dig more into the Brian Asamoah thing because he looked fine to me. His PFF grade coming out is a disaster. So I kind of want to see, based off of like kind of the all 22, what's composing that. I think that he is shooting the wrong gaps a lot. We had an argument about that on the internet. So obviously that was worth everybody's time. I'm glad people could enjoy that. But I think that he is just kind of playing fast and just like letting mistakes occur, which is probably the way you want to do it, honestly. But he's making mistakes a lot. Like, yeah, if you're making a mistake, you want to do it fast rather than slow. But you probably don't want to make the mistake is the key here. And he seems to be making a lot of mistakes in terms of like choosing gaps and stuff like that. But for the most part, pretty good stuff, especially from that defensive line. And I really liked what Caleb Evans was put together, and Andrew Booth before he got hurt. And it sounds like the injury's not serious. So,
well, let's talk about the pass rush, specifically the he ended up with 2 sacks, which was impressive.
T.Y. McGill had 2 sacks. Or contributed on 2 sacks. I don't know if they awarded him a half a sack for one of those. 2 hits and 3 hurries. So 7 pressures on just 22 pass rushes. So a pressure rate of just under a third, which is just incredible stuff, right, for an individual game. Led the team in pressures, led the team in sacks, led the team in quarterback hits. Overall, not a bad day's work. Also showed up in the run game with a couple of great tackles at or behind the line of scrimmage. Like, we talk a lot about the sacks, but his primary job might be to defend against the run. He did a really phenomenal job of that. And the thing with him is that he's doing a really good job of kind of reading the defense and reading the offense and figuring out kind of what side of the offensive line he needs to squeeze down on and how to shed a blocker in order to make a play at the right moment. Because a lot of times defensive linemen, when they're defending against a reasonable run blocker, they might actually be able to get off of that run blocker's block somewhat quickly. But if they don't time it correctly, they allow the back to bounce out as opposed to making the tackle behind the line of scrimmage, right? And then the back, if he bounces out, might find a new lane and he could make a run and maybe, a play that you could have if you had timed it correctly, gotten a negative 2 yard run. Now it's a 20 yard run because they bounced outside. So he's doing a really good job of timing that too, in situations where he's got a little bit more control of the opposing blocker. But for the most part, a couple of pass rush moves, they've been really effective for him. But primarily, he has been incredible getting off the line of scrimmage. It's both a consequence of his really high level burst and quickness for a player of his size. He's listed at 294. I think he's a fair bit bigger, but either way, I mean, he's just wicked fast coming off the line of scrimmage. And the second is like that he's pretty good at anticipating when the snap occurs. And I think that's just part of being like an 8-year veteran, is that, you know, he knows based off of the opposing offense kind of when they want to get the snap off. And so that combination makes him just scream off the line of scrimmage and win right away, which is not always going to work against starting quality offensive linemen. But man, is it a good way to terrorize these backups.
Well, and you had said something interesting on Paul Allen earlier today, and I don't mean for you to go through it word for word, but there was a discussion earlier today with Paul Allen about about veterans in camp, and how you always kind of want to hedge your bets on a veteran really tearing it up in camp against second teams and third teams and all that. Is that what's really happening here, or is there something else?
I think that there is something to it. Now, like, one thing to keep in mind, so like T.Y. McGill has been in the NFL for a number of years, and he's not been a star player, right? Otherwise, he wouldn't be on like 5 or 7 or 8 different teams, right? He'd be on 2 or 3 teams and negotiating a third contract for millions of dollars. But this will occasionally happen. The Vikings most famously have seen this happen with Tom Johnson. You do want to look at a couple of things, not just the quality of competition they're going up against, which, I mean, these offensive linemen, San Francisco was sometimes dipping into their third string linemen, right? When they had their second team out there, as opposed to, going into their second string linemen, because those guys were playing to replace, Mike McGlinchey, right? Colton McGivitz, I think, was playing instead. And so they're going a little bit deeper. You want to take that into account when you're taking a look at kind of who he's winning against, how he's winning, and so on. But on top of that, you also want to take a look at what is translatable, what's not, right? Because I could say, hey, Kellen Mond is beating up on 2s and 3s. That might, like, after the Raiders game, that might tell us, that he's good, or it might tell us that he can only beat the 2s and the 3s. We don't know. We do know that better players tend to do well against backups than worse players do, right? So how do we kind of break that down? We break that down by taking a look at fundamental traits, which is why we were able to say, hey, Mond was late to this throw. Hey, he was inaccurate to this throw. Instead of looking at the production, we're taking a look at how he achieved that production. We conclude based off of that first preseason game that actually, despite, the 130 passer rating, it's not there for him yet. With McGill, you do want to take a look at, is he just winning because he's guessing the snap? That's not going to work in a lot of games in the NFL. Is he just winning because of the burst off the line of scrimmage? Well, starting offensive linemen are a good deal more athletic than backup offensive linemen by like a huge degree. So that might not work in the NFL. Is he winning because, his hand placement's precise, that he's really good at these swim moves, that he's got a good counter? Well, that will translate. That is something that, might help. So it's about how they win and what they're doing against the competition, not just the level of competition they're up against. Now, for McGill, I do have that concern, right? That he is winning because of, I wouldn't say cheating, but like in a manner that's not necessarily going to translate into the NFL with the snap timing, and then also burst that really overwhelms, these backup linemen, right? Because it's like one of them is Minnesota guy Sam Schluter, right? He's just not athletic. Like I watched him play in Minnesota. He's not that athletic compared to like a Tristan Wirfs or a Brian O'Neill or something along those lines, right? And so going up against these, defensive ends or defensive tackles that can run up field as quickly as someone like McGill can do, he's going to get overwhelmed. But that's not going to translate when they're up against, Teron Armstead or something, right? Like it's just not going to be there. So to that extent, I think that is a concern. But I saw McGill beat up on starting offensive linemen with the 49ers and with the Vikings. So I think that there is something there.
Are you tired of talking about nickel corners yet?
It's a concern. both talking about them and the nickel corners themselves.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about it. How does it look?
I mean, it wasn't great, but you didn't really get a good read on the nickel corner situation. So Nate Hairston did not have a very good game. He was playing like 35 snaps of the 46 snaps in coverage that the corners took in this game. And, you didn't have Perry Nickerson. Chandon Sullivan was resting because he's a starter. And so you primarily had Nate Hairston covering the slot, and he just was doing a very poor job. Gave up 30 yards in the slot, was not great whenever he was targeted. Did not get targeted very deep downfield very often. In fact, I don't think he gave up like a huge gainer, but he just was never in position. And that's like a pretty big concern, especially up against not the greatest San Francisco receivers, right? They're not putting out Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel out there, right? Danny Gray wasn't, the guy that was terrorizing him. It was, a bunch of guys that may or may not make the team. But you can't really tell what the state of the nickel corner is because of this, because the top two guys at the position functionally were not playing. And so you're kind of left with the impression that you get from the Raiders game and the impression that you get from joint practices and the impression that you get from padded practices. And that impression for Chandon Sullivan is just not very good. That impression for Perry Nickerson's not great, although he flashes, which is kind of fun. I think that Chandon Sullivan is unambiguously a better corner, but Perry Nickerson has just these really fun moments. I think we saw one in the Raiders game, but also just generally speaking, like in camp, he's had some really fun moments. So there's that. But yeah, I don't really know what to do. I talked about it with PA on KFan about how to handle the nickel corner situation and what the depth there is going to look like. And I think primarily your depth is going to be on the practice squad. I don't think that your depth is going to be making the 53 man.
Well, let's talk about the rest of the corners, because again, there's not much offense. There's not a lot of defense we can talk about. But how did the rest of the team seem to fare in the second preseason game?
Yeah, I mean, before Andrew Booth, I guess re-aggravated a rolled ankle, which, not too bad, honestly. Of all the injuries Andrew Booth could sustain that we're worried about, that's probably the one that you wanted, because it sounds like he's going to be back pretty quickly. But before that, I mean, he was doing pretty well, and he played 10 to 15 snaps in coverage, and he gave up 1 or 2 receptions. It just wasn't bad at all. It was nice to see him close quickly. Harrison Hand, again, played well. Doesn't matter. He got cut. Caleb Evans, a really great game. There were moments in camp where Evans looked like the more ready of the two receivers between him and Andrew Booth. And that's not to say he is more ready. There were just moments where he looked like he was more ready. And, he's been doing a better job of figuring out the timing of when to close in on a guy, doing better on the timing of mid-pointing in his zone against 2 deep receivers. He's got a pretty good awareness and instinct, even if he doesn't have the same fluidity as someone like Andrew Booth. And it's showing up a little bit more in the preseason. He played a ton of snaps. I think he played every snap, if I remember correctly. Gives up a lot of receptions, but none of them were these worrisome receptions. They were all kind of he's keeping stuff in front of him. He's not giving up actually that many first downs. He's not giving up any touchdowns. It's all I think aside from one, it's all the 6-7 yard reception where you just kind of don't have to worry about what he's doing, because it's all kind of part of the plan, as it were. I think the average depth of target for his receptions was the lowest among any of the non-nickel corners. And so his reception totals aren't great, but his actual play was really good. So, he knew how to keep everything in front of him. And he knew how to make sure that, the deep stuff wasn't going to victimize him. So really good stuff from him. I don't know if he's, going to be ready to do anything, but that's a nice sign to see in terms of trying to develop, additional depth of the corners.
Well, let's put a bow on it. Is there anything else that we need to know about that abysmal little Saturday night loss?
Yeah, I think Jordan Berry is winning the punting battle.
Are you sure? We're going to have a punt off. I love that term. I love that this is a thing.
Punt off. Yeah, we're going to have a punt off, punt/off. I believe Jordan Berry is well ahead of Wright in this scenario. And also he's a better holder based off what we saw in camp.
All right, well, let's finish this up then, and let's get to the cuts because today was a cut day. So there were a couple of cuts. You've obviously heard Harrison Hand a couple of times here being referenced as someone who is no longer on the team.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't really know why he was cut. He had a really good game. Obviously, much more goes into it than that. But like Chris Boyd is probably the guy that if you're going to pick a fifth guy is going to make the team if he's not a nickel guy. And Boyd is valuable in special teams, but so is Harrison Hand. And Boyd is just less available throughout camp. Like he's been working off to the side a lot. He's not been available for a lot of these practices. Harrison Hand has had to take his spot in scrimmages and in padded practices while Boyd just kind of I don't know what he's doing because the Vikings aren't counting him as injured. He's not a partial participant. But there's just some days where he's just off to the side, even though he's fully padded and has a helmet and is working with like the athletic staff. Now, obviously it's not laziness. Otherwise they would have just cut him, right? It's clearly designed, but that availability concern just adds another question as to why you would cut Harrison Hand. Maybe they're worried about like a injury settlement, but still you probably just cut someone else instead of Hand. He has a little bit more inside flexibility, so he could have been shadow depth at that nickel spot. But for the most part, that one is a confusing one. He had one bad moment in the San Francisco or in the Raiders game, but for the most part, played really well in the preseason and played all right in practices. So that one is surprising to me.
Well, who else was taken off the team this today?
It was kind of not that explosive outside of Hand. So, which, it's saying a lot to say that that's explosive. But Ryan Connolly and Blake Prohl, who are already on the physically unable to perform list, were now placed on the reserve physically unable to perform list. So that's just two more cuts that kind of free that up. They waived Sean Beyer, who is clearly the bottom tight end on the depth chart. So it just wasn't that explosive. Like it just wasn't that big a deal. Like we knew that Sean Beyer was going to get cut. Might as well be now. We knew that Connolly and Prohl were not making obvious progress in terms of their ability to see the field. Might as well put them on injured reserve as soon as you can. So it's just Harrison Hand, really, from 84 to 80.
Well, the Vikings traded for a quarterback. They talked to the Raiders and proceeded to trade for Nick Mullins, which they basically got him for a song. They got him for a conditional, 7th-round pick. So they're basically getting nothing. The Raiders basically getting nothing out of this. Would you? Yeah. Who do you think is going to end up being put on the practice squad then?
Yeah, that one's tough. So my guess is that if you cut Kellen Mond, someone else is going to pick him up. And maybe that's what ends up having to happen. Like the problem is, so the Vikings acquired Nick Mullins for a great deal. It was a fantastic deal to spend not even a 2023 7th, a 2024 7th that you don't even have to pay if he doesn't make the active roster, right? So it is functionally risk-free, the least you could possibly pay for a quarterback. And Nick Mullins is a relatively high-level backup. Like his level of play in his 17 starts is much better than you should ever expect from a backup. He had a number of games above a 100 passer rating. He had a couple more games above an 85 passer rating in his starts. I'm going to say 5 above 100. Let's see, 1, 2, 3. Looks like another 6 above 85. So in his 17 starts, he's played as a fairly high quality quarterback. That's not something I think you would have expected from Sean Mannion, not something you would have expected from Kellen Mond. And so, yeah, a fairly good player that gets the ball out quickly that, maybe he's not, throwing deep downfield all that often, but he is, identifying open receivers, getting the ball to them. Given the price that they gave up for a guy that seems like a fairly good backup, I don't know what price you could possibly sell to another team for Kellen Mond. Like maybe you could make the case that, the other team thinks that there's upside yet to be tapped, whereas with somebody like Nick Mullins, they don't think that. But if you acquire a guy to replace someone else, that someone else should be worth less, right? Like you would think that the price for the guy that you acquired is because you like him more is going to be higher than the price for the guy that you're going to let go. So I don't think you could trade Kellen Mond, but I think he's going to get picked up right away. So that's the tough one, right? And if I'm Kellen Mond, I don't even know if I sign with the practice squad for the Vikings because A, I'd feel insulted by the Vikings, but B, I feel like I'd probably get a contract somewhere, right? That's going to be better than a practice squad contract. So, ideally you'd try to see if you could develop Kellen Mond. Maybe you that era is over. And maybe you just put Sean Mannion on the practice squad because that is pretty easy to have a veteran. Like you've got a couple of veteran spots in the practice squad now. Sean Mannion seems like purpose built for that specific role. Yeah. So I think it's Sean Mannion, but it is just a very difficult quarterback room situation to figure out.
We're all going to look like idiots when he ends up coming in and ends up edging out Kirk Cousins for the starting job, aren't we?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, this is exactly where it's all headed. Well, the Vikings have one last preseason game, one last chance to potentially get a win. They are heading to Denver this weekend. Third preseason game, the final preseason game. Are we going to see any of the starters play for a set or two?
I doubt it. We asked about whether or not the starters got enough snaps against the 49ers in the scrimmages because obviously they didn't play against the 49ers. But, the coaches were like, yeah, they got 80 plus plays of football speed, high quality reps against another team's ones, right? And you're just not going to get that in the preseason while you still have the ability to avoid the risk of like taking guys to the ground. So my guess is no, the Rams, never played their starters in the preseason. So I think we're not going to. I would like to selfishly, but after seeing kind of like some of the injuries pile up over the course of this last weekend in the preseason, not for the Vikings, but like around the league. I can see why they would avoid it. So my guess is no.
Well, what do we have as far as kind of position battles that'll be decided in this third preseason game?
Again, the bottom of that receiver, position battle roster spot. Like again, Tristan Jackson is ahead of Myron Mitchell, but I don't know that either of them will necessarily make the team. And I think that you may end up in a situation where Jalen Naylor is more valuable than either of them, despite the fact that he's not producing as a receiver because of how poor Amir Smith-Marset is as a returner. Jalen Naylor just seems a more comfortable returner, and neither of those two, Jackson or Mitchell, are competing for a returner job. So if that's the case, and you don't trust Amir Smith-Marset back there, and you only trust Kenny Nwangu to be a kick returner, because we haven't seen him take any punt return reps, then it might be Naylor's job. And if Jackson or Mitchell cannot prove it definitively that they are rosterable receivers, you may end up with a receiver room where it's Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, KJ Osborne, obviously, Amir Smith-Marset, and BC Johnson as your 5, and then your 6th might not be on the roster, or might be Jalen Naylor, or might be a guy that you don't expect to actually play receiver for you. And maybe it's none of those guys, maybe only a 5. And you figure out your punt return position kind of some other way. So that's kind of the more interesting one. It very much seems like at right guard, Ed Ingram has won that position. But if Oli Udoh cannot get things together, the Vikings might only carry 9 offensive linemen instead of 10. So Oli Udoh is basically fighting to be a 10th person to add it to the offensive line room because Chris Reed, Jesse Davis are obviously making it. Austin Schlottman's made a really good case for himself. That's your interior. Blake Brandel is a tackle. That's 9, right? Now, that means you don't really have a second tackle unless you consider Jesse Davis, who's played a lot of tackle in the NFL, not very well, but has played a lot of tackle in the NFL, as your second tackle, and that versatility gives you some flexibility elsewhere. But that's kind of the position battle you're getting there. I don't know that there's really a position battle at tight end. Maybe Zach Davidson is attempting to prove that you can have 5 tight ends. I don't know. Right? Because it would be, I'm just trying to count, Irv Smith, Johnny Munt, Ben Ellefson. I guess Zach Davidson would be 4 unless Nick Muse somehow forces himself into the conversation. So I guess 4 tight ends. But I don't know if that's going to be the case. The defensive line battle is about as interesting as the receiver one to me in terms of the bottom of the roster because we've seen Jonathan Bullard only take 9 snaps. It very much seems like he's ascended from the bottom of the depth chart to primary backup. Like, fantastic work on his part. We have not seen that for T.Y. McGill, so there's something that they see in Bullard that they don't see in McGill. So it very much seems like McGill is competing for a roster spot. We saw James Lynch take a lot of snaps, not as many as McGill. And so he might be more certain than that. but it's between like Bullard and Lynch and McGill and of course Jalen Twyman. And if they only keep 6 defensive linemen, which is totally possible, then one of them is the 7th. And then what do you do with your 5th round rookie, the guy from Minnesota? Does he make the practice squad? I mean, I assume he would get through waivers, but that's just kind of an awkward spot to be in. So that's an area where you could use a little bit more clarity of position, whether or not you could carry 5 or 6 cornerbacks. Personally, I think you're only going to carry 4 linebackers, but I guess you could carry 5. Blake Lynch, I thought, was doing a really good job of saying that he should be the 4th linebacker next to Brian Asamoah. But then he had a not so great game this week, and Troy Dye had a better game. And so it kind of muddies the water a little bit. So maybe we could see some clarity there too.
All right, well, let's head over to the mailbag. And the first question is from Professor Poop. So Mond and Mannion must have been catastrophic fecal disasters to be replaced by Mullins. If Kirk were to go down in week 1 for good, but the defense is a top 12, weapons great, and offensive line solid, could the power of Mullins compel us to a non-crappy or even Keenum-esque season?
Nowhere are you getting a Keenum-esque season. You need a volatile, doesn't care quarterback, which Keenum was, for a Keenum-esque season, right? Like, obviously, great weapons for Keenum. Not actually a very good offensive. Like, this is a better offensive line than the one Keenum had. But he was just willing to throw whatever. And for the most part, the Vikings' luck was pretty good in that regard, until, of course, it ran out, famously. But you were able to make a deep playoff run because he was able to take chances, and those chances bore out. Mullins is not taking chances, but you have a top 12 defense with pretty good weapons. Mullins has shown us that with a worse group of weapons, admittedly a better offensive line, with a worse group of weapons, he can make points appear. He can turn into a guy that feels like a starter at times, which is not what you get from Sean Mannion. It's not what I anticipate you'd get from Kellen Mond. I think you could have a solid season. I don't know if you want one, right? Like, I don't know if you want like a 9-win season or an 8-win season. Like, that just feels kind of crappy, but which I guess is in the spirit of the question. But it is a solid season, and maybe you could convert that into a 10-win season, which then, you're in the playoffs. But I don't see a Keenum-esque season. I see a potentially non-crappy season, and a non-crappy season is a crappy outcome, right? Because then you don't get the pick. You just get, you almost made the playoffs. You were respectable. Thanks.
Let's go to Cody, who asks, is Nick Mullins the best backup quarterback the Vikings have had since Brooks Bollinger, the pride of Grand Forks Central High School?
Yeah, us Red River guys. I never went to Red River. Us Red River guys. I'm like spiritually...
You were zoned for Red River if you were to attend high school in Grand Forks.
Yeah, and my brother went to Red River, right? Like, yep. I have some affinity for the Rough Riders.
I got my diploma from there, yeah.
Yeah, and while in middle school, I made fun of people that were zoned for Central. Screw the Knights. So I don't recognize Brooks Bollinger.
This took a turn, a real turn.
Affinity for a high school I didn't even go to. Look, we were all united for the big flood, and then it collapsed. It disintegrated. No, I mean, the best backup quarterback the Vikings have had is Brad Johnson.
Yeah,
easy.
Let's go to Ed Donatello, who asks, having already broken Brett Favre's records at Southern Miss, how long do you expect it to take for Nick Mullins to best Favre's first season in Minnesota? As far as I'm concerned, Favre only had one season in Minnesota, and based on the cuts that the NFL is making in their Game Pass or whatever, it's entirely possible they're just going to edit out his second season, and I'm fine with that.
Yeah. Were there to be a second season, they might edit it out. Yeah. So point of order, Austin Davis did technically break Brett Favre's records before Nick Mullins. This is a dumb sentence, but true. And then Nick Mullins broke a lot of Austin Davis's records, which includes yards, touchdowns. That's about it, actually. Well, Nick Mullins also has the interception record. I don't know how you feel about that, but that's true too. Um, yeah, so I don't know that Nick Mullins will go 33-7 in terms of touchdown interception ratio like Favre did, like actually Kirk Cousins did last year. But, you could see it for 2024. When you have to pay the piper for that 7th round pick in 2024, that's when Nick Mullins mode activates.
Oh, absolutely. Also from Ed Donatello, is Twyman worth keeping for his developmental potential, or is the pit star not going to show up in the NFL?
So I think we're way past the pit star version of Jalen Twyman. No way. Again, would love to be wrong. If I'm proven wrong, no shame, right? But I don't see it. I don't see that that's going to be, 2 years of attempting to try and find that guy. But that's not fair. 1 year he got shot and then wasn't playing, so maybe that's not fair. But this year, we're not seeing any version of that. To me, Jalen Twyman's worth keeping on the roster because he is a pretty good backup tackle. Not because he's got the potential to achieve the all-world stuff that he was putting together in 2019 at Pitt. That's just not a player worth chasing anymore. The question is, is he good now? And does he have the potential to be a little bit better in the future? And I think the answer to both of that is true. But I don't think that it's worth trying to achieve the high level of upside that he demonstrated at Pitt. He's just reworked his body a lot. It's been a lot of years since then. I don't think that you can recover that. So I think if he's worth keeping on the roster, it's because he's doing a better job than like Odomewo.
All right, let's go to Eldon Vaislar, who asks, when do the Vikings coax Ryan Fitzpatrick to come out for one last hurrah?
When Kirk Cousins goes down in week 3, Nick Mullins engineers an incredible comeback victory. Who are they playing week 3? Let's see the Vikings schedule.
It's usually the Lions.
Usually. There's actually a really good chance it's the Lions. Because I know that they do have the Lions pretty early on. Week 3, it is the Lions.
Yep.
Nailed it.
It's usually the Lions. I know that because Victor, my younger brother, and I used to go to the Lions game every year because the tickets were obscenely cheap, and it just happened to be his birthday, so we would just head out there for that.
Fantastic. So week 3 against Lions, they engineer an unnecessary comeback, I guess. I don't know. I mean, they lost the Lions last year, but an unnecessary comeback. It's glorious. They fly all the way to London. Nick Mullins' first start in a Vikings uniform against the Saints, just dunks on the Saints. Just an incredible job. And then week 5 against the Bears, he gets Joe Theismann, never to play again. You call in Ryan Fitzpatrick for week 6 against the Dolphins. A revenge game, which I like. How many teams is it not a revenge game for?
I was going to say, I think it's more revenge than not revenge now for his list.
Right. The balance is revenge. Yeah. But, a revenge game week 6 against the Dolphins, a revenge game week 8. I don't even know if he's played for the Cardinals, but a revenge game week 8 against the Cardinals, a revenge game week 9 against the Commanders, a super revenge game week 10 against the Bills.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, we've got a revenge tour. Again, I don't know if he's played for the Cardinals or the Commanders, but everyone knows he's played for the Bills.
Well, he's suited up for the Commanders.
Ah, see, there you go. Oh, wait, no, that is definitely true. That was pretty recent, actually.
Yes. Like, I don't usually get a chance to correct you on NFL history, so let me just take this moment.
Yeah, just savor it.
Yeah.
You've also got a revenge on the Jets, against the Jets on the schedule, right? Has he been a Giant? Do we know?
I don't believe he's been a Giant.
Probably not a Colt. I feel like I'd remember if he was a Patriot.
He was not a Patriot.
And then probably not a Cowboy.
No.
Okay, so in Ryan Fitzpatrick adjusted terms, a relatively weak revenge schedule, but one with revenge games in it. Yes,
one with an alarming amount of revenge. At least this isn't like a Kill Bill style streak, but it's
and also like how much revenge does he really want to take out against the Bills? Like, oh no, you give me millions of dollars.
I mean, he showed up to their playoff game shirtless, so like. I don't think there's much revenge to be had there.
I mean, he's not a revenge guy either. He'll put up 400, 4 touchdowns and 8 interceptions just because that's what he likes to do.
Yeah, like I'm just really big into like even numbers. We're just gonna make this happen. Did you guys know I went to Harvard? Ken Lovin asks, outside of Ingram and Scene, who do you think in this draft class will be the first to be the starter on the team?
Well, for someone like Brian Asamoah, it would take an injury, right? So, um, more likely it would be Andrew Booth. That feels like the obvious answer. So the spiciest answer is instead a Caleb Evans. He ascends past Andrew Booth on the depth chart and is uh, good at football.
Boy, that's more than you've said about Chad Greenway in the past.
In the past several years, I have said Chad Greenway is good at football. I just after that also said that he's not, but that was evaluating a different time period. So,
oh, fine. Kenneth Allen asks, what is the most surprising thing to come out of camp / preseason so far? Seems like a lot of the results, both good and bad, were reasonable to expect. Is there anything that has come out of left field?
Man, I really wish Julian Taylor didn't hurt his hand because he was doing really well in camp until the injury, and that would have been like a really nice surprise that he would be kind of in that mix as like an undrafted rookie free agent. To me, it's kind of Zach McLeod. The Vikings were in a bidding war with him against another team in the AFC. Don't know who. And apparently it took quite a lot to get him in Minnesota. And, he's already taken rotations with the twos a little bit, had a really good game against the Raiders, not so hot against the 49ers. But him kind of showing up in that capacity was a pretty nice surprise. And I feel like him having an opportunity to make the roster above somebody like Janarius Robinson it's still on the table. It's still kind of an interesting outcome to expect. But other than that, yeah, it's been very expected. Maybe Lewis Cine not being a starter is a surprise because he seemed very ready to play right away, and right now just does not seem super capable of that.
Well, let's go to the Browns Massage Therapist Union.
Jesus, I'm glad they've unionized.
Yes. Who asks, I take Kevin O'Connell's non-committal comments just to respect the current team dynamic. For Arif's 5D chess corner, given the minimal investment, just guaranteed money, in Mullins, is there any way they still scour the waiver wire / trade options leading up to cut day?
Well, in terms of quarterback, no, but they definitely have room to take a look at, the guard position, although I think if they were going to, they would have by now. I think Ingram's just won that job. The center position, same thing. But, those are options on the table. Primarily this is like a really good opportunity to get receivers and running backs, but the Vikings were good there. Maybe a nickel corner. That actually, now that I think about it, seems like the most likely scenario where they grab a nickel corner off the waiver wire, or even trade for one as a backup to Shannon Sullivan. I don't think they're going to find a starter that way, but I think, as a backup, because Nate Hairston was pretty poor and Perry Nickerson, I think, just kind of doesn't have it to be, considered reasonable depth. But if they could find a nickel guy or a guy that could play both inside out, that'd be a pretty cool acquisition to make.
Next question is from Joshua, who asks, according to PFF, Cam Dantzler has graded out very well the last 2 seasons. However, it seems as though both the fan base and coaching staff lack confidence in him. Example, booth competition, playing in preseason, etc. Where does this disparity arise? Also, how has he looked in camp?
I don't think the coaching staff lacks confidence in him. Maybe they entered the offseason not having a ton of confidence in him, which is why they would make an investment in the quarterback position. But I don't think that, they didn't play Cam Dantzler in week 2, right? So assuring his job as a starter. And so, I think that primarily a lack of confidence is because in big moments in big games, Cam Dantzler has kind of fallen short, like against, Cooper Rush in Dallas, or, just near the end of games, when he's been the starter, we've seen him, as well as like the rest of the defense, honestly, collapse a little bit. But on a play-to-play perspective, I guess he played all right. He's looked fantastic in camp. I don't think he's looked like a Pro Bowler or anything like that, but I think that he's looked like the second best corner on the roster. I think that it's unfortunate that the best corner on the roster is Patrick Peterson, and most of the time that would be a good thing, but obviously at this stage in his career, you'd kind of hope that somebody would at least kind of ascend above him and that Peterson would be a really good number 2 to have. But Dantzler's looked really good. And so that's why I think the coaching staff does have confidence in him, because they've regularly played him on the first team. They very rarely put, like, there's a competition, quote unquote, between him and Andrew Booth. They very rarely put Andrew Booth at cornerback one. He's not being rotated in all that often. We saw Ed Ingram rotated in at right guard more often than Booth got rotated in at cornerback, or Sean got rotated in at safety. So I actually don't think that there's a lack of confidence in him. I think that he's looked pretty good, and that the PFF grades are kind of bearing out here.
Next up is Fern Valley Supply Company, which is a real Twitter account.
Why is that? Is that
hold on? Actually a company, apparently.
It's okay. That makes more sense. I was like, is there some joke I'm missing?
Nope, not as far as I can tell. The question is, with Kevin O'Connell's background as a quarterback and offensive coordinator of a modern offense, is it reasonable to hope for better clock management, particularly in the final 2 minutes of the half? During the previous regime, I found my drinking spiked dramatically during these times.
Well, I didn't realize that an inanimate social construct, i.e. a corporation, could drink, but, if anyone could drive them to, it would be the Vikings.
Yes, that.
Yeah, so I think that it is reasonable to hope for a lot better clock management, but I don't think it's because O'Connell has the background as a quarterback or as an offensive coordinator of a modern offense. I think that, sometimes you see guys with those backgrounds have, particularly poor clock management, like Andy Reid, for example, modern offensive coordinator, has a quarterback background, kind of. Doug Peterson, same thing. Sometimes his clock management has gone awry. Sometimes it's really good. Sometimes it's really bad. We've seen some bad clock management from quarterbacks and offensive coordinators of relatively modern systems. So I don't think that's it, but I think that there's reason to hope for better clock management. One, because Zimmer's was particularly bad, but two, because they've gone out of their way to hire a game management analyst, somebody whose sole job it is to figure out, whether or not we want to challenge this or not challenge this, figure out whether or not we want to call a timeout here, figure out kind of what the time situation is, and basically map out all of the best opportunities or options for somebody in a game management position. And their sole job is that. Like, very typically, a coach will have somebody in their ear about challenges. It's just somebody in the booth that already has another job. But often the coach will themselves make a decision about when to call a timeout and stuff like that. Here, that cognitive load has been offloaded into somebody whose sole job it is to determine, what the best game theory outcome is, to call a timeout here or to challenge there. So, yeah, it sounds like it's such a focus that they hired somebody specifically for that job. And I think that because of that, it is reasonable to assume better clock management, but not because of the background, but because of the particular attention paid to that element of the game.
Kevin Mellick asks, "Hi, Arif and James. Who would be the most interesting player to follow if the Vikings were on Hard Knocks this year? Also, does Hard Knocks offer any benefits? It seems like a lot of distraction for no good reason."
Well, to answer the second question first, not really, except that it is required. So the benefit that Hard Knocks provides is that the NFL makes money. The NFL, knowing this, understanding that they get to make money from this, has required teams to take on Hard Knocks if no team volunteers for it. And there's a number of parameters for that. Like, if you have to not be a first-time coach and also not make the playoffs to be in consideration to be mandatorily assigned Hard Knocks. But any team can volunteer. Like, a playoff team could volunteer for it. A team with a first-time head coach could volunteer for it. They just choose not to, right? Because it is a distraction. But it is not a benefit to the team. It's a benefit to the NFL, either because of the advertising, but also because of the direct deal HBO pays to the NFL for that privilege. So that's that. As for the most interesting players to follow, I don't know the backstories of every one of these players. Luke Braun is a person who kind of goes into that in a little bit more detail. So he might have a better answer to this question, but just the fact that Luigi Villain has been at a couple of schools, has that name, that's just kind of fun. My interactions with him have been very minimal, but seems like a pretty cool guy. I like Dalvin Tomlinson a lot. I think that his personality is fantastic. I think Harrison Phillips has a remarkable personality. He's so fun to just talk to, interact with, and have like a I just have a camera on him at all times because he's always going to say something interesting. Amir Smith-Marset is another guy that is always going to be talking, is always going to have something interesting to say. Maybe Andrew Booth as well. But, the guys that Hard Knocks likes to focus on are not always starters. They're like these back of the roster guys where you kind of learn the story. You learn kind of what makes them tick, what the backstory behind them is. And a lot of those guys, this year I just haven't had very much time to delve into to learn the backstory of. So maybe Dan Chisena, who's, personality has not stood out to me, but he has an interesting story. Maybe Blake Prohl because of his, father and brother in the NFL. There's kind of a story to be had there. Kyle Hinton because of a Division III background. But in terms of the personality, I just haven't gotten to know a lot of these players, in part because, COVID restrictions over the past 2 years, but also because I haven't had time to really dig into them because of a lot of these other obligations. So I can't tell you from a personality perspective. I can't tell you from a background perspective, but in terms of the players that I like to see interact with the rest of the team, Dalvin Tomlinson, Harrison Phillips, Eric Kendricks has opened up a lot over the past couple of years, so he's been kind of fun. Patrick Peterson obviously is kind of like this like stalwart. I don't think he's actually a very good television personality, but he's like a good guy to kind of follow to get a kind of mood on in the camp. KJ Osborne's good to talk to. I don't know if he has like because there's always like something entertaining, right, about the guys that they're following. Osborne is fantastic to talk to. He's like in a good position to win the Media Good Guy Award. Like I love having him on the podium and having an interview with him. That is a different thing than being like entertaining on television. So I don't know if that's going to be there for him, but there are a couple of players that are interesting. I just don't know if they fit exactly the profile Hard Knocks always looks for. Maybe Zach Davidson, right? Because the whole thing with Zach Davidson. I don't need to explain that one.
Yeah, they're looking for like the Vince Wilfork in for the Texans moment when he showed up in the
the overalls.
In the overalls.
Oh my God, incredible.
Or they're looking for the James Conner, the Terminator from the Jets season. Like they're looking for that sort of guy. Beef Brewski asks, for Arif's Eschatology Corner, theologian Luke Braun asserts that that hell in Hell League is eternal. What is your position? Are the damned eventually annihilated? Is it more of a purgatorial state where we are eventually saved after purging? Or is it simply Luke's eternal torment?
I think Luke's psychological condition plays a role in his interpretation of the afterlife and punishment here. I think like the fact that Luke is constantly tortured by his own existence forces him to understand punishment as an eternal state. So that is, I think, playing a pretty big role in the way that he interprets the Hell League. For me, I think the Hell League is very similar to Event Horizon, right? Where you can exit hell, but it won't ever leave your brain, right? Once you enter the Hell League, that has become a part of who you are from now on. And you're going to carry that with you for the rest of your probably shorter life. So in one sense, the hell in the Hell League is eternal because the Hell League, now that it has been created, will always exist in some form or another. So in that sense, it's eternal. It's also eternal in the sense that you'll always carry the trauma and the scars of the hell in the Hell League with you, even when you are no longer a member of the Hell League. But it is not eternal in the sense that the actual torture you experience as a product of the Hell League is always present with you at every moment. So there's a lot of different ways to kind of interpret it. I would like to think that it is possible for therapy to ameliorate the experiences of the Hell League long after you exit. So in that sense, it is not the same as experiencing the actual torture of being in the Hell League. I think that these are all different, and that Luke Braun's tortured existence is really coloring his response here.
And it's really funny to watch, too.
Yes, I enjoy it.
What I've enjoyed personally is getting messages from everyone, I think, but you, involved in the Hell League, asking, am I a part of it this year? Like, what's going on? And my response being, oh, no, you were in the first Hell League. You're not getting out you're not getting out easily. Oh, no, you're back. I'm not done with you people yet. Let me be perfectly clear. Kyle Slaby asks, which Minnesota Vikings, current or former player, would be most likely to have a slice of life anime written about their life? Which one would be the most at home as the main character in an Isake anime?
So I don't watch Japanese animation. I've never heard of anime, I guess is how you pronounce that. But my understanding is that a slice of life anime is not one characterized by extraordinary events or one characterized by a fantastical set of circumstances. It just kind of follows somebody, like it says, like a slice of life. They could be a comic book artist or they could be a high school student, just kind of going through the normal ups and downs of that particular profession or lifestyle. So who would be kind of the best for that? Brian Robinson, easily. Follow him when he's hunting, follow him when he's fishing, follow him when he's just kind of palling around the Vikings facility for no particular reason. He's easy to make friends. He's always kind of entertaining on his own. You don't really need to worry too much about something happening that's going to capture your interest. So Brian Robinson, easily the answer to that. Now, the most at home as the main character of an isekai anime. Now, my understanding of this particular genre that I am unfamiliar with is that a character gets transported. So a character from the normal world gets transported into some sort of other world, whether it's the future or a fantasy world of some sort, or as it seems to be very often, a video game with a particular set of rules. Again, all based off of very cursory research. I'm not familiar with any of this. Now, that person, so the reason that this becomes so popular, in the same way that Harry Potter is popular, is that it's very easy to explain the rules of the universe because the point of view character also has no idea or gets to talk it out if they do have some idea. Like, let's say it's a video game they play a lot of. But like there's a plot reason, right? There's an inbuilt reason that someone needs to explain the rules of the universe to the character and therefore to the audience. Very lazy writing, 10 out of 10. So who would be most at home in that sort of world among the Vikings? The funniest would certainly be Kirk Cousins, but mostly because I don't think he could handle it. I think the most protagonist energy is probably like Amir Smith-Marset. Like, it feels like somebody who'd be a wide receiver or a quarterback, maybe a running back. And it has to be somebody who's got like kind of who would not question the fact that they are the protagonist of the story. Right? Like, that's really important.
That's
right?
That reads backup running back. Like Madison just walks in like, yeah.
No, there's no way. I don't think like Madison would be like, why is this happening to me? But not in a way where like they're questioning life. It just like doesn't compute. I cannot see it it would have to be somebody who sees themselves already as the protagonist. There's no way Alexander Madison does. There's every reason to think Amir Smith-Marset does.
Well, you learned two things today, folks. You learned that, and that Arif, despite claiming that he knows nothing on a topic, can go 7 minutes on it.
Why did I name a single one of these animes? I didn't name one.
Yeah.
I named Harry Potter. That's not even animated.
Here's the most, let's go to Arif's neglected resistance bands first. Has life started to matter yet? Kevin asks, what is the ideal time to eat lunch?
All right, so, oh boy, lunch. Okay. Is lunch the meal you have prior to dinner, or is it the second meal of the day if you only have 2 meals a day? Right? So if you wake up at 11 and eat food at 1 p.m., is that lunch, right? And you only have 2 meals that day. I don't know. It kind of depends on your interpretation, right? Because lunch is typically the second meal of 3 in a day, maybe the second meal of 4 if you live across the aisle and observe tea time or whatever. Live across the aisle, live across the ocean. But like primarily, second meal of a three meal day. But if there's only 2 meals, is that lunch? Some people only eat 1 meal a day. Is that lunch? I don't know. But in a world where you wake up somewhat early, let's say 9 a.m., right? Like early is like 5 a.m., but somewhat early is like 9 a.m. Early is 6. On time is 8. I'm just making these up. But like you wake up at like 9 a.m., right? You have breakfast at 10. What is your ideal lunchtime? I think for you in that scenario, it's 2 p.m. But I think for a lot of people, it's noon. For a lot of people, it's 1. Personally, I prefer 1 p.m., generally speaking, as the time to have a meal. Sometimes that's my first meal of the day. Sometimes I woke up 5 minutes ago. Sometimes I didn't go to bed. Either way, I like 1 p.m. because it just like noon feels like you're trying to have lunch at noon. It doesn't feel natural to me. It just feels like we've decided that because this is when the clock is at the top. And that just does not strike as lunch to me, even though that's when you have it at school. It's when a lot of times workplaces do lunch breaks. But I think 1 p.m. just feels more relaxed. It's a little bit lazier. You don't feel as rushed. But 2 p.m., it feels like it's kind of late. You're kind of, if you eat a little bit too much lunch at 2 p.m., you're kind of digging into what you might have for dinner. I like 1 p.m.
So I'm looking at this purely from the standpoint of somebody who works an 8 to 5. And
Weird.
12.
People do that?
I'm sorry, what?
So they go to work at 8 a.m.
Yep.
And they leave work at 5 p.m.?
That's a thing that a number of people do. Many people
Why?
are doing this.
Okay, but like, do they crave the structure of it? Is that why they choose those jobs?
No, it's not about craving structure necessarily as much as it is the ability to pay rent.
Okay, but if you could pay rent without doing that, surely you would.
Oh, no, if I could sleep all day, I would, and I would have no qualms about it whatsoever.
All right.
Yeah, just let me be perfectly...
All right, so the rare circumstance where you go to work at like 8, leave at 5 or whatever. Yeah, okay, fine. Yeah, in this hypothetical scenario.
Yep, in this hypothetical scenario that you get to work at 8 and you leave at 5 and you get an hour lunch, my suggestion is always 12:30 because it cuts the afternoon a bit.
Neatly in half?
Almost. It makes it actually, if you take it at noon, then it cuts it in half. But if you do 12:30, it actually makes it so that there's a little less time in the afternoon. And if you take a little bit of time to get back into what you were doing, you're already at 2 o'clock, and now you only have 3 hours left instead of 4.
Oh, I see. So like, I guess tricking yourself is the wrong way, but it's like a psychological, I don't know, trick is the only word that's coming to mind, but it's like a psychological maneuver to like to bisect your day in such a way that it feels like the end of your workday is sooner.
Yes, that.
Okay. Yeah, I get that. I'm just going to have to take your word for it. I like lunch at 1 p.m. because it's lazier.
Like, Arif is sitting here just going, I don't know how to emotionally relate to any of this. I don't sleep. I don't work a desk job for an 8 to 5. Time is kind of an odd construct too. Now that we're mentioning it, just yeah.
The notion that you get to stop working is a fascinating one. I'd like to explore that one
more. Okay, you know what? That's fair. I've spent a lot of time. My work-life balance is all messed up over the last 2 weeks. I'm the vice chair of a festival in a town in Minnesota, and so like the whole week is just nuts, and I'm running around doing everything after I'm done with my day job. And then this week is all about getting all the stuff ready for all the incoming students at my job. And then next week is the first week of class, and that's always ridiculous too. So like, I am literally in need of a vacation by Labor Day. I will be dead. It'll be fantastic. So I'm a bad person to mention, or a bad person to ask about work-life balance, or even when work ends during a week, I suppose.
Amazing.
I'm getting a sliver of a taste of what it's like to be Arif Hassan NFL. It's not good. I don't recommend it.
I have a headache.
there's no money in it. You eye the 5-hour energy suggestively. Like, it's bad.
Convince the time gods to give you 30 hours.
I just need 30 hours today. Let's go to Alex, who asks, it may be too late for a question like this, but I'm wondering if you gave Arif $1,000 for every person he correctly named to the final 53, but he lost it all if he named one that got cut, how much money would he be able to make?
So here's the thing. Like, at some point, I just stop because it's like not worth a tiny amount of risk, because I could probably name 40 that would make the roster, because it's always the last, 10 or 12 that's kind of the bubble. But even though the risk from 40 to 41 is small, the difference between 40,000 and 41,000 is meaningless to me. Not because $1,000 is meaningless to me. I would take $1,000 right now. My life would be so much better. But in my head, am I envisioning these, to me, large numbers because, I'm a poor, 40,000 to 41,000 is just the same amount of money to me. Right. And I mean, like, obviously academically, I know that that's not the case, but if I'm like, oh, I could have the chance to have either 40,000 or 40,000 with a gold star, but the cost of that gold star is a 1% chance that I don't get any of that money, then I just stop. I'm just like, yeah, I'll just take the 40. Right. So I don't know what that number is, but it is not the actual number. I'm just going to stop. I'm just going to be like, yeah, Kirk Cousins makes the roster. Give me $1,000. Right. Like, it's just
like, all right, it's going to be Kirk Cousins. We're going to get Justin Jefferson and we're going to get Delvin Cook. You know what? Madison too.
Right.
All right. My bathroom's getting fixed.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's just like, all right, well, I can finally fix the flooding in my basement. I'm so happy. Right. Thank you, Harrison Phillips. Like, I'm not going to ever know the number, because I would just, I'd be like, hey, I got enough to fix my house. I'm good. Bye.
Like, I'm reminded of all the times you watched people gamble in Vegas. Not gamble yourself. Just watched people gamble in Vegas.
Yeah. Very entertaining.
Yeah. Euleron asks, would you have traded a 5th-round pick for Cody Ford? If you answer with a confident no, is the Vikings O-line suddenly underrated?
The only reason I would answer no, and it's a less confident no, but it's still a no, is because of all the Bills fans in my feed that were like, wow, great price for Cody Ford. And why if that's where they're at, all right. So that's why I'm just like, if they're celebrating the great deal they got, I don't know. I don't know about that. So I kind of a no. I know that it was he was some people's draft favorite, or maybe not favorite, but he was some people's preferred draft pick at that spot. A couple years ago, and obviously he couldn't hack it at tackle or guard. But I feel like the Vikings could probably make better use of a 5th-round pick than somebody who couldn't make the Bills' offensive line. Now, obviously, the Bills have a very good team, so I'm not saying it like, oh, I couldn't even make the Bills, but more like, I don't think the Vikings could do better than the Bills could in developing this player, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I'd just rather they just try on their own.
The gaming nerd asks, at what point in the preseason do we prematurely panic and call for the jobs of everyone? Is 2 losses enough? Should we panic at 3 meaningless preseason losses?
You should have panicked at 1 loss plus the first Kellen Mond interception. So
that was a really ugly interception.
It was bad. It was bad. If you lose that first preseason game, obviously the house is on fire. Clearly, no question about that. And then you enter the second preseason game. Kellen Mond throws a couple of completions. Hey, that's a good completion. Hey, that's not a great completion, but it's a completion. Hey, that's a good completion. And hey, the firefighters just showed up. They're pouring some water on the roof. Your house is going to be fine. Your possessions are mostly okay, and the ones that are not okay are covered by insurance. The sentimental stuff is still salvageable. And then he throws a pick, and actually the fire department turns out to be an F-15, and it's a missile at your house that's still on fire. That's what the Viking season has turned out to be. based off of the game plus the pick. Now, obviously, the second pick, that's just you're asking for collateral damage at that point. The fighter has turned into a fighter fleet, and they're not targeting you; they're targeting the neighborhood. The third game, that's when you start asking, like, well, what kind of are we dropping? Daisy cutters? Or are we going like actual nukes here? That's the concern.
Now you have to deal with the homeowners association.
Oh, that's worse. If there was a fourth preseason game, yeah. So the third one is you're asking if they're dropping nukes. The fourth one is you have to explain this to your homeowners association.
Yeah, that's just not good for anybody. Also from the gaming nerd, for Arif's alternative media corner, what moment from Kirk Cousins' career would be best to adapt into a movie, and why is Nick Cage the best actor to play Cousins?
So the Nick Cage movie is punt/off. Nick Cage plays Kirk Cousins watching the punt off, but then also attempts to join the punting competition because a Nick Cage character would do that, despite being the quarterback.
What if Kirk Cousins secretly has just like this amazing coffin kick ability?
That'd be incredible. No, the best moment of Kirk Cousins' career for a Nick Cage movie would be the 10 days he was out of the Green Bay game with COVID. Like, what was he doing? Let's follow his adventures. It's a slice of life.
Let's follow his adventures.
Yeah. Did he spring for like Sunday Ticket? Did he watch it on like DirecTV? Did he download Game Pass?
You made it sound like he was like a Winnie the Pooh character or something. Let's follow Kirk Cousins on his adventures, shall we?
Every time he drops a mortality rock into his death tube, he gets transported to a whimsical forest where
he occasionally gets stuck in a honeypot.
Yeah, or, he's next door neighbors with somebody who guts the Department of Education. Either or.
All things. That was oddly specific. All things, of course, are possible through the power of Benvenucci. R. Menson asks, for Arif's parenting corner, my 7-month-old has recently taken to biting and trying to eat people, especially faces. How do I stop this behavior? And yes, I know the parenting corner is traditionally James's, but given that he has famously failed in this area, I'm not sure how valuable his advice is.
Famously failed. So first, I would make sure that you don't pour water into your cereal. I think that one's pretty key. Based off my history of dealing with people whose children engage in cannibalism, that seems to be a pretty critical failure step. So that's one. Two, have you tried smearing your face in bug spray? I don't know how to. Would that deter a child? How do children work? They can taste, right?
Yes, they can taste.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, if your face is covered in bug spray, it should be fine.
They don't care. They're still going to come for it. Children don't learn. We used to be a country, a proper country.
Yeah, famously, children do not learn.
That's
the thing they don't do is learn, for sure.
I want to name the episode that so badly now. Episode 430. Children don't learn. Just imagining, a couple thousand people checking their iTunes or checking their iPhones in the morning, just going, "The hell did?"
Is he calling Vikings fans children? Is that what's going on here?
Oh, this is clearly part of the Kirk Cousins debate. All right, let's listen. Let's see what this has to do. Meanwhile, we're discussing whether or not he can punt. That's terrible. Don't put bug spray on your face in order to stop a kid from eating it. It doesn't work like that.
What? Look,
I don't have any good answers. I just know that doesn't work.
Okay, so would you rather have no answers or one bad answer?
No.
Don't answer.
I think we've answered. All right, fine. Don from Ohio has a Vikings-related question.
What?
The hell? Don from Ohio. This year's Vikings defense feels like a 2003 defense in a lot of ways. A lot of holes in it. However, they mask their weaknesses as best as possible. It took until the 8th game versus the Giants for it to be exposed in 2003. How long does it take for this defense to be exposed?
So I would have said week 3, but then we found out mid-show that week 3 is against the Lions, so never mind. Week 4, right? Like week 1, people are just going to be like, oh, yeah, they got torched because it's the Packers, it's Aaron Rodgers, whatever. Week 2, Jalen Hurts, I'm not worried about it. Week 3 is the Lions, I'm not worried about it. Week 4, not a great quarterback either, but slot receiver, is Michael Thomas healthy? He's got to be healthy now, right?
He was complaining about hamstring stuff.
Okay, yeah, so he's fine. So week 4 in London against the Saints, 8:30 a.m. Central. That sounds like a good time to be exposed, right? Michael Thomas from the slot against Chandon Sullivan again and again and again and again and again.
Dan Campbell turned the Lions practice over to his players. Why don't James and Arif trust their listeners enough for us to run the Norse Code podcast?
Well, football players in the NFL have done a lot to demonstrate that they deserve to be there.
Yeah, what have you done, Don?
Mm-hmm.
Other than disappoint your wife with a pellet grill. I didn't say I wanted to include.
I got what you were going, but I don't think the listeners necessarily did.
I just wanted to have that little emphasis at the end. Fine. Also, I've been playing the Wrestling Empire app for several weeks now, and as difficult as it is for me to say, Arif has done an amazing job as a pro wrestler. He sent screenshots of this to the Discord, which, again, you can access by joining Patreon. It's phenomenal stuff. He's done an amazing job as a pro wrestler. He's won multiple titles, including the Heavyweight Championship, and has made close to $2 million in earnings. My question for you guys, is this the most unrealistic video game ever made?
Okay, so reading this question before the show, I was like, what is going on? And Jim's like, what, you haven't seen it? It's in the Discord, which 2 reasons I haven't seen in the Discord. 1, whenever I open Discord, my life gets worse. So I try not to do it. 2.
But we encourage you to join the Discord over at patreon.com/norsecode. Thanks, Arif, for that ringing endorsement.
No, hold on. Most of the people listening to this podcast are Vikings fans. They enthusiastically embrace opting into something that will make their life worse. Join the Discord. You'll find a bunch of like-minded people, but not me. 2, I show up. I'm in the Discord. 2, the channel that is devoted to wrestling is the only channel in the Discord I have muted. So I had no idea this was happening. And James was like, okay, I'll ping you so that you know what's going on. I went through the screenshots. Really upset that I had to grow hair on top of my head but shave my beard. That sucked. For whatever gimmick that my manager made me take. But no, okay, so I'll say this is not the most unrealistic video game ever made, and I can say that with certainty because I've never lost a fight, and yes, I've been in a lot of fights, just not since high school. One of the reasons I don't get in fights is because I know where the line is. One of the reasons that I win fights is because I know where the line is, and I cross it repeatedly when I fight, which feels very wrestling to me, right?
It's there.
Yeah. The ref's looking the other way. You bite someone's nipple off. Just normal stuff.
Jesus Christ.
Is that making it into the show? Or
yes, that's making it into the show because I expect the out of context guy to have a fit with it.
Yeah, it seems like a pretty realistic video game to me.
Arif, get some sleep. I think we're at a point now when you're threatening to bite people's nipples off. I think
no one has gotten into a fight with me, therefore there's no threat. That 100% holds up.
All right, let's finish this off with Bob the Pigeon, who asks, Arif has been hired by the Green Bay Packers not to bite off nipples, but as a personnel analyst right before the season. They want you to come up with 3 players to put them over the top and into the Super Bowl. Which 3 players do you tell them to trade for that are plausible to their front office as improvements while secretly trying to ruin their roster?
All right, so one of the areas of concern for a lot of people for the Packers, not for me as much, I think that this unit is better for them than people anticipate, and I think that by the end of the preseason we've already gotten there, or we will have gotten there. But the receiver position is one that a lot of people have talked about. And if you were to say, make a criticism of the Packers receiving group right now, even though, Christian Watson's back from injury and Romeo Doubs has been lighting up the world and Sammy Watkins seems fine, is that it's a bunch of wide receiver twos. There's no primary receiver. There's no Devontae Adams. There's no Jordy Nelson. There's no Donald Driver, whatever, right? There's no primary receiver that Aaron Rodgers can go to. Why not get Antonio Brown? There's your primary receiver. There's somebody who's always going to run a route, and if the ball is near him, he's going to catch it. So I feel like that's a good way to put them over the top, or at least convince them that it'll put him over the top. And of course, he will blow up the team from the inside. Phenomenal work. Number 2, Nelson Aguilar. That one's just funny to me. I can't explain more than that. I think you all understand. Number 3, Bakhtiari's injury is concerning, and you can't have Tevin Jenkins play all 5 positions. And yeah, we really like Zach Tom at right tackle. In fact, we like Zach Tom at right tackle a lot. But you always can use a little bit more power. And I feel like, and the Packers have already, I think, traded away an offensive lineman. So this isn't the greatest spot for you to be able to say, hey, we are making moves here, but I don't really trust John Runyon at left guard. I think Sean Ryan's a little bit too young. Why not get a tackle-capable guard in Tevin Jenkins? He's mean. He knows the division. He lost a battle to 5th-round rookie. He's the perfect player.
Clearly has a chip on his shoulder.
Yeah. And hey, we've seen him play with a chip on his shoulder. He was the meanest offensive lineman in that draft. So certainly, I mean, the Packers were so concerned with their offensive linemen that they drafted 3 of them, right? They drafted Sean Ryan, they drafted Zach Tom, and they drafted Rasheed Walker. Why not get the meanest guy out of the 2021 draft? Why not get Tevin Jenkins? Perfect.
See, this question is already flawed because for the most part, the Packers don't bring in free agents like this. So it doesn't work, but I still like the idea of them signing Antonio Brown and
it's perfect.
And Aaron Rodgers just having that'd be a podcast I would listen to. Just the two of them just going back and forth. Because one of them's an idiot and the other is going to be Antonio Brown, and he's not that far off.
Just the theories of the world that they will hash out on the Aaron Rodgers experience, I guess.
I want Aaron Rodgers to describe to Antonio Brown why the world is flat, and Antonio Brown to be the sane one for a moment.
No, I want Aaron Rodgers to explain why the world is flat, and Antonio Brown to counter with an explanation that the world is a hexagon in 6-dimensional space.
Yes,
that sounds like a phenomenal podcast, and also it occurs during a game, and it ruins the season.
Yes. There's a lot of lamenting going on there. Antonio Brown is on the show during the game discussing how sad he is that he can't watch himself podcast now. It's great.
All-time great performances.
Yes. That is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. We will be back next week to review the game against the Broncos and some of the final roster cuts. Arif, what do you have to plug?
All right, you can find me on Twitter at ArifHassan NFL, ArifHassan NFL. I'm not on other socials, so don't follow me on Instagram, you weirdo. You can find me at The Athletic, theathletic.com/author/Arif-Hassan. My most recent piece is one that explores the fantasy projections that are given by fantasy experts across the industry for the Vikings, key players, and what I think of them, which is primarily that they're wrong. So check that out. I'm also going to come up with a piece about how often quarterbacks turn from average to elite late in their career. So we're looking at, or at least elite production, maybe not elite players. So comparing the potential of Kirk Cousins in this offense to somebody like a Carson Palmer, a Matthew Stafford, an Alex Smith, etc., who in the middle of the career put up like phenomenal numbers in a new system. So that's going to come up. And then obviously risers fallers from the final preseason game against Denver.
Well, that's going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Again, thank you guys so much for listening. We'll be back next week. So for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening. And please remember that the Vikings are not to be trusted. And we'll be back next week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, and wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan of The Athletic, and he can be found at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN or my personal account at Big Mono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can do so in a few different ways. You can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there. For $3.50 a month, you get bonus material and more. You can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode for a one-time donation, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and pick up some Norse Code merchandise. Any questions or comments that cannot fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this.
Hey, all things are possible through the power of Ben DiNucci.